Good evening, everyone. We have a special meeting tonight of the Public Safety Committee. It's a working session, and we'll start with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Schreiber?
Here.
Here.
Rothman?
Here.
Thompson?
Here.
Bailey?
Commissioner Vahey will be a few minutes detained. So tonight's special Public Safety Committee meeting is being held to hear a presentation from our Abington Township Police Department and to consider all methods of traffic calming. We will be hearing information and discussing options and alternatives from speed tables to rapid flashing beacons to bump outs and other techniques. We'll be considering the pros and cons as well as intended and unintended consequences. Thank you for attending this evening, and we look forward to your input. And with that, I'd like to call on our Chief, Pat Malloy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner Schreiber, members of the board, Manager Manfredi. Thank you for having us here this evening. I can tell you I started with Abington Police Department in August of 1994, and while we've had many priorities, by far the biggest priority has always been traffic safety. So while the first presentation that we recorded focused on speed tables and speed humps and rapid flashing beacons, we know that traffic calming encompasses so much more than that. So this evening I have with me Lieutenant Porter, who is the administrator who supervises our traffic safety unit. We have our traffic safety manager, Al Freed, traffic safety officer, Chris Posey, and Melissa Gargan, who supports the traffic safety unit. So I just wanted to thank you, and I'm looking forward to hopefully coming up with some solutions of what we can do, not things that we cannot do. There's always possibility to improve traffic safety.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thanks for having us this evening. And members of the community, thanks for coming out. We'll go through this presentation, and again, there'll be some time for, I believe, some questions, and we'll have some answers if anybody has at the end here. But we'd like to talk about, the Abington Police Department realizes the impact of traffic safety and how important that it is, not only in our community, but statewide, nationwide. It's been a big push over the last several years. And I'd like to think that we're one of the towns in the area that are more proactive in this matter, whereas we listen to our residents, we listen to the commissioners, and take the best practices and put them into practice when we can. So what you see is we've come up with a traffic safety policy. It's not yet been adopted by the Board of Commissioners, but where we've derived our ideals from is a federal manual. I won't get into that too much. And then there's a PennDOT manual as well. But also, we've reached out to our colleagues over the past years and have consulted them as some of the best practices for similar-sized townships such as ourselves, because just because something works in one area, it certainly doesn't work in another area. So we've also been in direct contact with several of our colleagues throughout the region, in the tri-state area actually, to see what they use and what's applicable here to Abington Township. So speed reduction, we know that that's a big concern for everybody. I mean, no matter what neighborhood, wherever you live, there's always somebody going to be speeding. We can't catch everybody, we realize that. But we have a three-pronged approach that we use when we're addressing some traffic safety issues, and speed is certainly one of them. Education for everybody involved, not only the citizens of the township, but the violators that may be driving, and sometimes those are citizens as well, as we know. The enforcement, when we have direct contact with people and we need to enforce the law, whether that be a citation or a warning, some type of active enforcement, and then traffic calming measures. Some of the measures are physical traffic control or intervention methods. They're designed to self-regulate. When we're not there, they're supposed to do something to help us with traffic control, obviously. They're intended to reduce the negative effects, obviously, and these include speed tables, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here tonight. But again, as the chief said, we're open to suggestions, ideas, things like that. I think the more communication that we have, the better that this process will be, and that we can help everybody out. And certainly, I'm sure that some of the residents may have some good ideas. I was told I can't move around too much.
We won't pick you up if you're not talking into a mic.
Okay, I'll use a handheld. Would that be better? Yep. Okay, I'll do that, just so I can see people and talk at the same time here. Areas considered for traffic calming measures must meet a bunch of standards, and they're listed here. There's several criteria: speed, volume, number of crashes, proximity to schools, school bus stops, pedestrian traffic, pedestrian facilities as well. A speed cushion, maybe you've seen some of these in some of the other residents, some different neighborhoods. Those are also known as speed pillars. As you can see here, they're spaced out a little bit. That's to let emergency vehicles get their axles across without causing damage, so they can pass through without causing damage to the apparatus, whether it be ambulances, fire trucks, heavy equipment, things like that. And they can pass more quickly without slowing down. Speed humps, this is probably what you're most familiar with. It's typically 3 to 4 inches in height, and they're 12 to 20 feet long. They go across the roadway. And then these speed tables, you see some of these popping up. New Jersey's big in these. They've been implementing these in different parts of their neighborhoods over the past couple of years. And you're starting to see some in some of the suburbs of Philadelphia now as well. Rapid flashing beacons, or RFBs, you may have heard that acronym used. Relatively new for us in Pennsylvania. Pedestrian comes up, they push a button, the beacons start to flash, bright LED yellow lights that alerts the motoring traffic that somebody's there to cross the roadway. And some additional measures that we can talk about. Neck downs, that's where we narrow the roadway, that the highway department would actually take a roadway and they would narrow it at an intersection in a residential neighborhood. A bulb out, that's where the curbs extended out so pedestrians have less distance to cross from one side of the road to the other. A chicane, we actually modify the roadway. We'll put a curve in a roadway to slow traffic down. Traffic circles, I think that's self-explanatory. And then some traffic islands, you see them in different parts of the township as they are now. For tonight, we'll be talking speed humps and speed tables. And specifically speed humps, they're designed to reduce the speed, but not the volume of traffic. And that's what a lot of people sometimes forget. They think if they have a speed hump there that it's going to reduce the volume, but that's not necessarily so. It's a raised surface into pavement. Like we said, 3 to 4 inches high, 12 to 20 feet in length. They have to be signed, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and painted in accordance with accepted engineering practices. Some advantages, and some of these are pretty self-explanatory, but maybe some that you might not have realized in the past. They can be effective at reducing speed of vehicles. They may be. Compatible with bicycle, motorcycles, and pedestrian traffic, and they may reduce traffic volume. They may. But as you'll see in the disadvantages, there's some, when you push traffic from one area, it's got to go somewhere. So one thing that residents fail to consider sometimes is the noise that these speed humps or speed bumps cause in your neighborhood. Everybody wants them, but they don't want them in front of their house because vehicles in the middle of the night, they're banging, they're clanging, they're driving over them. Slow or fast, they do make noise. Increased maintenance costs, and I'm sure our highway department could comment on that as well. We have to put 4 large signs out for each one. So somebody's yard is getting a sign, or maybe 2 or 3 residents would get signs if we have to put them out. Sometimes increased response time for emergency vehicles, difficulty in snow removal and plowing, possible negative impact on the water drainage on the roadway. That's another consideration. And then traffic diversion to alternate streets. And that's there's a whole process that we're going to talk about here in a minute, but that traffic diversion, like I said, maybe you've experienced it yourself, but in other towns, our colleagues have shown us that when they put speed bumps out on one roadway, people find an alternate route to get around that. So it may not be your road, it could be your neighbor's road or something like that. Decreased parking, this is also a consideration. We looked at a road recently just to see if it was feasible, if that road were brought up, and the amount of parking that the residents would have lost was pretty significant. And it wasn't an actual request on our part, but to do this planning, we call it like a tabletop exercise, if you will. We would try to do this planning to see what it would actually look like. That's what we came up with, and it wouldn't be feasible, wouldn't be fair actually to the residents to lose the amount of parking that they would. And any ADA requirements, we can't infringe upon the ADA requirements depending on where this would have to be replaced. Some considerations with these, street classification. Is it a state roadway? Is it local? Things like that. Lane width and number of lanes. The grade of the roadway. The alignments. Can't be curves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Sight distance. Sight distance is big for us. That tends to be one of our prevailing factors when crashes occur at intersections. People simply can't see far enough, so we need to make sure we maintain that. Traffic speeds, volume, and safety. We talk about crash data. We get a lot of complaints, these cars are speeding, and we've had all this reckless driving on our roads. But we have all the data, and we're happy to share that with anybody if we're looking at your roadways. But we look at the crash data. And here's something to consider. No hump should be placed within 100 feet of an unsignalized intersection or 250 feet of a signalized intersection. May not sound like a lot, or it may sound like a lot, but it's something to consider. Other considerations, studies have shown that they're most effective if they're used in series. We need two at a minimum, 3 is recommended, 250 to 600 feet apart. We can't put them on curves with a radius less than 300 feet. We can't use on the grade that I talked about. Want to be used with the curbing in place as well, because if there's not curbing in place, what do people do when they avoid the speed bumps? They drive on your lawns. We've seen that. And then remember, we got to paint the roadways and we got to put signs up. So this is a part right out of our actual policy that we've been using for years as a guide, like I said, based off the best practices of towns and neighborhoods similar in our size, as well as the federal and state standards. Some things to look at, particularly there. The street can't have be 30 miles an hour or more. In the count of the vehicles, we have to do a vehicle count too. Can't be less than 1,000 vehicles and no more than 6,500 vehicles per day. So, that's just some things that we'll be looking at. The average speed, we'll talk about that, and if you have questions on this later, I can get Officer Freed to comment a little bit more on that. But the 85th percentile, that's what we determine when we're using speed surveys. And again, it just mentions where the speed humps have to be placed and how they're not. One thing is that they got to go across the entire roadway with 1 foot on each side for water drainage. No less than 12 feet in distance. If you look down there, I talked about everything except the agreements have to be signed by public safety organizations, which means the fire company, an ambulance. They have to sign off on this. Also, the Public Works Department head has to be consulted and agree. And then it has to go to engineering, and the engineering studies be done. So how do you do it? Some people say, how do I get this if we want to look at one of these for our street? So you have to file a petition. 70% of the businesses or residents have to approve, and this means those on adjoining streets as well. We do studies. We go out there, we do speed, volume, and crashes, and then we determine if it can be utilized. If it can be, a secondary petition has to be filed. And then we pass a recommendation on to the township. An engineering study has to be done. We hire an engineer. The board would then approve a resolution, and then we would install them. Well, we wouldn't, but the highway department would. 85th percentile speed. I know we say that often, and you may have heard it in some other meetings, but that is the speed at which 85% of the traffic is traveling at or below. And this is used for regulation in relation to signage, setting speed limits, and obviously what we're talking about here, traffic calming. And we do that on any roadway. If somebody says, hey, cars are really moving on Old York Road, we'll get PennDOT and they'll do a speed survey and they'll say, well, actually, you're within the parameters of where it should be. We're not going to change it. Or they may come back and say, hey, you know what? Our speed limit's set a little bit low. We should raise it. We certainly wouldn't want that in most aspects, but that is a gamble that you take sometimes when we do these studies. And again, that's based upon federal, state, and local guidelines there. So traffic calming, it can be implemented after the 85th percentile speed exceeds this posted speed limit by more than 10 miles an hour. 85% of the traffic traveling more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. So if you have a road that's 30 mile an hour, 85% of that traffic has to be going 40 or more. The standards, the traffic calming manual of the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code, and promotes safety. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, the 25 to 35 mile per hour. They're saying that that's not excessive. If you live on a roadway and you have somebody doing 35 miles an hour, that is not excessive regardless of the roadway that you live on, and allows traffic to flow. Again, that's just a restatement there, so we'll go over that. The cost, that often comes up. Speed humps are right around $2,000 to $3,500 each, plus we have to pay an engineer. And then speed tables, they're $5,000 to $15,000 plus engineering costs. And should be noted in there that that's not talking about upkeep and any additional things that may be needed. There could be some environmental issues in that area or on the roadway that could require something more significant or more specialized to address that. If you have questions, that's the traffic safety email address, and that's my direct number to my desk. Feel free to write it down. We'll take any and all questions, comments, concerns that you might have. Feel free to call, and we'll certainly take a look at things and address it. That's all I have, Madam.
Are you going to be going over any of, I know we were focused mainly on the speed tables and humps, and you mentioned the rapid flashing. Can you do any kind of like pros and cons and costs for that, or other
No.
like stop signs with the lights around them and things like that as well?
Certainly, we can. Stop signs with lights is a good one. That just came out. Pennsylvania has just recently been approved to use the LED lighting on the stop signs. Some of that's the cost that we would incur for that, and some of that's the placement and the rapid flashing beacons. Al, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Good evening, Commissioners, and thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. As far as the rapid flashing beacons go, the only drawback to them is the price or the cost of installing them and maintaining them. They run about 5 figures, depending on what you have to do as far as to put them up and to keep them flashing. Some are solar, others you hook into the electric, so it all depends what option you would use there as far as what the price would be. Most of these traffic calming things that we bring up, one of the biggest sticking points is obviously the cost. Speed humps, which we all commonly know, they're really considered to be used for parking lots only. They were like the 4 or 5 inch high humps, and they were only maybe 6 to 12 inches wide. So they now call them speed tables, but they still use the speed hump term in conjunction with that. They're anywhere from 12 to 20 feet in width. And again, one of the big things there is the cost. Obviously, you're talking a longer area as far as materials being used, plus the signage and the roadway markings that you need to put down as far as the speed humps go. As far as the stop signs with the flashing lights, again, that would be cost. They are quite expensive. I think when we checked, they were like anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a piece. So, because again, they run on solar. Yes.
Yeah, that would be the stop signs that are outlined in the flashing LED lights. You're starting to see some of them pop up in different areas. There are other traffic calming measures that we're implementing, and maybe you've seen them. We've been running our speed signs. We've been putting out these radar speed signs now that we recently purchased. A couple of the versions that we have actually collect the data from the traffic, which is very nice. It tells us gives us all the data, the traffic, the speed, the time, maximum speed, minimum speeds, 85th percentile speed. Officer Posey plugs it into a computer and downloads all the data and then interprets it. They've been pretty effective where we've put them out. We are intending on purchasing some more of them.
They're the ones that flash how fast you're going when you, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. They
And
attach to poles.
We have how many now, and how many are we looking for?
Well, we're looking to get 3. We'll have 4 total. We had 1 damaged in a crash, unfortunately, but it's being replaced. Somebody crashed into the pole and destroyed it, unfortunately.
Jeez.
But that individual's insurance is paying for it as soon as he's done in court. So we'll have a total of 4 of those signs out, and it's not out of the realm of possibilities that we could purchase more if needed at some point in time.
How much do you know?
Right around 25. It depends. We get a multi-pack discount, obviously.
Gotcha.
They're right around $2,500 to $3,000 a piece, depending on how many we buy each time. $3,000 a piece is pretty safe on that. Some of the other things that we've been doing, and I apologize for rocking back and forth between the commissioners and the public, is you may have seen some more what we call ghost cars put out. You may see a car sitting somewhere that you haven't and thought that there's a police officer sitting in it. We've been using them, and then we replace it with a real police officer and do some enforcement as well. Different things like that to keep the public aware that we are out there. We know that there's certain areas, but we know that we can't be in every area at all the time. So we try to maximize our visibility, whether it's a marked car, an unmarked car, or a car that has nobody sitting in it. But those have been effective measures as well in this year especially.
Okay, we're going to open it up for questions in just a minute, but I just wanted to ask 1 or 2 others, and then I'll open up to the committee first. So if there is a speed table, I guess that's what we're calling them now, speed tables, in the road, how does that affect if the road is being paved? Maybe that's an Angelo question, I'm not sure, but.
Yeah, I think Angela better able to answer that one.
Well, if there's one that exists already, obviously you gotta remove it, and you're starting the whole process over, so whatever it costs, you're gonna incur that cost again with paving, because we mill the road, so that bump will have to, or hump, or whatever you wanna call it, have to come out of there. And then if it costs $5,000-$10,000 to reinstall it, you're gonna have to reinstall it.
So you can't pave with it still there?
No.
Okay.
Because the pavers are set for grades, and they have, computers and all, so when it goes along, if you change that grade, you're gonna have a big mess out there, so we can't do it.
All right. And I have two other questions then. Like I said, I'll open it up to the committee first. In that, the sample, I guess, ordinance or whatever, resolution, I think we were calling it, it said 70% of residents or businesses must approve. To me, that seems low because that means 30% don't approve, and they might have it sitting right in front of their house. So where did we come up with that number, 70%?
I'll let Officer Freed comment on that.
That number is pretty much the generally accepted number when it comes to the surveys or the petitions. Really, in this process, there's two different petitions. The first petition, they want to make sure that the majority of the residents and businesses on the affected street are all in favor of that. So they put it at 70%. Now, there's some places where they've actually made it 75. So I went through.
So we could raise it a little bit
Yeah,
if
you
we
could
wanted.
raise it to 75, yes. It's 75%. We went with 70 in our policy because surrounding townships, that's pretty much what they use and look at, and it's also what's suggested in the traffic calming manual that PennDOT puts out. So that's where that 70% comes from. Then, if we get that 70% to agree that, they want to take a look at putting in speed humps or some kind of traffic calming, then that starts the process, and we go out and do whatever surveys need to be done and that kind of thing. And then the second petition, it's actually 70% of the residents and businesses on the street, but then it has to be 60% of the residents on parallel streets and the cross streets that may be adjoining the roadway in question.
Right.
Because there again, obviously, we've found, or studies have shown that when you put speed humps on one street, the tendency is traffic to move to other streets to avoid the speed humps. So they want to make sure it's all right with your neighbors for you to put in speed humps on your street.
So if we were ever to even go with this in some form, we could raise that number as well?
That's correct. That number for the secondary streets has been high as 65 to 70%, depending.
And one other question. It was mentioned about education as being one of the most effective. So do we have an education program in place? And can you talk about it a little bit?
We do have some different types of education in place. If any of you are familiar with the Survival 101 program, we put that on for students right now. Basically, if they're in our youth aid program, most of them are scheduled to go to that class, and that teaches them about all kinds of aggressive driving, driving under the influence. We have the pedestrian safety program where we go out and hand out flyers at high pedestrian areas and that sort of thing. The state runs their programs year-round for aggressive driving, seat belts, where part of the time you're out passing out information and other times you're out there doing enforcement. So there are avenues for education out there, and sometimes it's just setting up a detail and stopping people and giving them warnings saying, hey, we're getting a lot of complaints in this area, because the residents are complaining about the speed. So, you stop the people, you just give them a warning just to let them know.
You don't have to make them go to class or anything.
Nah.
Although that's probably a good idea. So again, I said I was going to open this up to the committee, but I just thought of one other thing. If if we want to implement some of these other things, like the signs, anything else, and we can afford it, because obviously everybody's going to want one, and every one, costs $3,000 to $5,000. We don't have all of that stuff in our budget right now. But if eventually we decide to do this, is there going to be a process similar that, you have to, I guess, if a resident wants one on their street, they're going to go to their commissioner, and do we have a formal policy in place or process in place for other things other than the speed tables?
Yeah, I think right now we do not have a process in place for the LED stop signs, things like that. We've been handling that through our commissioner submission process, and that's been pretty effective when the residents have been talking to the commissioners, and when they notify their commissioners and let them know they want something, we have a running spreadsheet that we address every issue and keep track of. So I think that process has been pretty effective, and I'd suggest keeping that, because we have a really good way to track that, and then we can do feasibility on whether, we can even track, we certainly want to make sure that the intersections that would need something like that, we're addressing right away. Rather than just based on perception, we use data. We would use our data to verify that as
Because
well.
everybody might want that on their street.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And they are nice, and they're aesthetically pleasing. And but I just think the best process would be is to keep that through the process that Mr. Manfredi had set up some time ago.
Okay, thank you. How about from our Vice Chair, Commissioner DePlacido?
Thank you, Commissioner Shriver. I'll preface my question with a statement. Currently, I have 4 heavily traveled state roads that run through Ward 4, Cedar, Township Line, Jenkintown Road, and are 3 of them. My question is, why can't we use speed calming measures such as these on the state roads? What is the exact answer to that?
The exact answer to that is PennDOT will not allow it. And I know you attended a meeting with me a while back about Township Line Road down by the old Rolling Hill Hospital there, putting in crosswalks. They don't put traffic calming measures on state roads, obviously, because especially if it's an area where their snow plows come out and plow the roadways, they can't keep track of every state roadway where somebody would put a traffic calming device or a mechanism. So PennDOT has just made a blanket thing that they do not put any traffic calming measures on state roads, and unless it's like maybe a median or something like that. But as far as speed humps or anything like that, they won't put them on.
I do remember that meeting. It was fascinating. It really was.
But if you ask Commissioner DePlacido, we can, certainly as we've done in other areas of the township, we can have them do another survey of that roadway to see if it's a speed issue, if that speed limit needs to be adjusted. We can have the PennDOT engineers do that. Mm-hmm. That's about the limit of what we can request the PennDOT engineers take a look at certain aspects of the roadway, and we would be more willing to do that.
Sure. They've taken a long look at a lot of our roads, and but as far as the snow plowing is concerned, we're responsible for plowing these roads. So that was the little give and take that I was looking for, because PennDOT does not plow Township Line or Jenkintown or Cedar. We do. So if that were the case, then why wouldn't we have more flexibility in adding these measures there? My other question was, I've traveled through the surrounding municipalities, Jenkintown for one, and they have a speed bump situation, if you would, on Walnut, I believe it is. And you had mentioned that parking becomes a premium when they're installed because you can't park 30 feet before or after. I drive down that street regularly, and I see them parking on the speed bump. How is that going to be enforced? Are people going to get tickets and citations if there's no parking on their street and they're parked 20 feet close to a speed bump?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that, because one of the things that we look at when it comes to that is, it doesn't seem reasonable that, somebody can't park there, but what people forget is when the water runs, that is the only place when you put them in, the water can adequately drain off the roadway and prevent flooding issues in certain areas. I'm not sure why they do not enforce it, but it does become a safety issue. Certain times, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Jenkintown, but I know that there may have been some issues there over the years with theirs. Those are the ones specifically that you're speaking about. But if people are swerving to take them at an angle, certain things like that to reduce the impact on their vehicle, which is what we see commonly, that does create an issue if people are parked right there. And it's really for the safety of the public. And obviously, we're real concerned about that. We only leave a foot at each side of the roadway with a curb. And if there's a water drainage issue, that could be a problem.
Okay. Just one more comment, too. Back to the state road thing. I also travel 2nd Street, New 2nd Street when it turns into 2nd Street all the way through Philadelphia, which is a state road, which is an emergency highway. And they just added more speed humps. So they're up to about 7 sets from Allegheny on up into what they call Northern Liberties now.
Yeah, the only thing I can tell you in addition to the state with the speed humps is the other big thing with them is liability. So even though we plow that, it's still a state highway. If anything were to occur on there because of a speed hump, obviously the state would be included in whatever was undertaken there as far as liability. So I know they take that into effect. I know Philadelphia, if you look at their traffic calming procedure, I don't know what it says about state roads as far as what their policy says. Again, when we researched this, PennDOT came right out and said we don't put them on state roadways. I can tell you that in Philadelphia's policy, they have it in there that if you request some kind of traffic calming and they put it in, if it's determined down the line that the residents don't want it there anymore, then the residents incur the cost of having all that removed. So that they do have that in their policy.
Okay.
So let me preface by saying I respect and couldn't respect more what you do as a police department, what the fire department does, what Public Works does, what everybody does in keeping us safe. I couldn't possibly respect it more. Yet when I'm reading this and all the stuff that I've been reading over the past 2 months as we dug deeper into this, it's like the Olympics with how many hurdles there are. And we all get emails every day, and I don't know the exact number, but it's got to be 80% or more of them have to do with traffic safety. And to me, we need to figure out a way to make things more flexible. I understand that we do have to operate within the PennDOT parameters, and in my legal career, I dealt with PennDOT. They're not easy. There's good people there, but there's rules, and no one wants to change rules drastically, and quite frankly, I think many of them have to be changed. But the thing I hear the most from residents is it going to take a kid dying? Is it going to take an old man being run over before we're going to do something about it? And I don't like that a lot of the times our answer is basically, not in these exact words, but yeah. Because that's the way I hear the rules. That's the way I read these rules. And I may not be the smartest guy in the room, but I know I'm not an idiot. And to me, the way that we respond to our residents as a collective group is as if they're not intelligent enough to realize that there's something we could do. There are things we can do. And I don't have all the answers. And maybe I just have all the questions. But we need to do something, and we need to find a way to make things more accessible. I love working with Chief Malloy, and I couldn't agree more with what he said when he just spoke earlier, that you're not here to say no, that we're here to try to find a way to do this. But for the life of me, I've been working for 4 years to try to figure out a way, and to me, the more I dig, the more things get in the way of us getting answers. Let me give you an example. Officer Freed, who may have the toughest job of anybody in the township because he goes to these meetings with us and he is the target, not a target, he's the target. And he will go to every single one of those meetings, and he will stay there for as long as he can. We were in a rainstorm together, and he stayed a long time. And I applaud that. And I think he handled the meeting wonderfully, and residents said that. Then we went and we put up some radar, and the numbers came back. And I believe in science. I believe in data. I appreciate those. But I also appreciate the residents who say to me, "Drew, my street's a mess. Will you please come stand here with me?" And I stand there, and I use my eyes, and I see a problem. And do I not care what that machine is telling me? No, I do care. But that can't be the thing that we're looking at to resolve things, because that machine doesn't account for the people on the corner of Heathcliff and Reese, who people come off of Rockledge Ave, and they don't even have the time to go fast enough to hit any of those numbers that we're looking at as one of these major parameters. And they're spinning right around a little corner that's maybe, I don't know, 200 feet off of Rockledge, that unless they were literally drag racing, they're probably not going to get to those numbers. But it's a disaster. I've stood there many times with the residents, and I wouldn't want to live in the spot where some of these people live. And I know those people would take on the responsibility, the burden, the ugly nature, the noise, whatever might come with it, in having a speed table there to keep their kids safe. And so you know, I'm pretty sure it would be 100% of those residents, because I've met with them 20 times over 4 years. And those people know how hard I'm working to try to help them, but we don't have a system right now that gets them answers. And this job that we're in is in part, all of us, to help get answers for residents like that. So I don't want us to have a speed hump that's going to mess up all the expensive fire trucks, because the fire department is an amazing group of people who get to houses so fast and save us all the time. So I don't want something that's going to mess up they're doing their job. And I don't want the snow plowing issue to be a problem where we can't plow or we have to repave and incur additional costs, which, by the way, I am in favor of us increasing by a tremendous amount the money that's allocated in our budget towards traffic safety, even if it does cut away some other services in here, because it's the #1 thing we hear about, and our job is to represent the residents. So I don't have the answers, and I may have just said some things that appear really obvious, but these are my concerns. And, you know, I know I don't have the 3-minute warning coming right now, but I know I've exceeded it. I just want you guys to understand that we feel helpless working with you on some of this. And it's not because we don't respect you or want to hear you out, but I don't want to feel helpless, because I know that if I feel helpless and someone that lives 6 minutes away from me feels helpless with this stuff is going on, that they're feeling helpless at all these times of day, every time their kids go out to play. And to me, we need answers. Now, I'm all the way on the other side of town from where we sit right now, the ward I represent. And I know there's different scenarios that I face as the commissioner in Ward 3 than someone may in Ward 15. But if those people in certain spots, if the people on Gibson who've emailed me 1,000,000 times asking for speed humps, and I know most people don't know all the stuff that we've gathered as part of this, and they don't have the memos that you guys have sent, but they want something done, and they rely on the idea, the concept of a speed hump, because they know that they slow down when they see a speed hump. So the people on Shady Lane, the people on Heathcliff, all over the place in my ward, they're desperate for something to be done. At a lot of these places, some of the more reasonable things might be some sort of flashing light. It might work. But again, there's a drawback there for the residents, because then there's a flashing light, you know, in their bedroom. We can't win for everybody, but we have to start winning more for the residents. And I am willing to put in as much time as it takes for us to get somewhere, but I just think we need to realize that this should be the priority of every single person up here. And I know it's a priority for you guys, but we got to get somewhere. And if we have to keep pushing back on PennDOT or have more meetings with them or whatever it is, we got to get somewhere, because the people deserve a lot better. So I just wanted, it was important to me to share those thoughts on behalf of my residents.
Commissioner Thompson?
Actually, first I wanted to echo Commissioner Rothman's sentiments on this one. It's, traffic safety has been a frustrating issue in my ward as well. I know that you guys are aware that my ward is mostly residential streets. They're all small and they're quiet, but we have a lot of kids running around, and, you know, I invite any one of you to come sit on my porch on a weekend and not have your heart jump through your throat, because, you know, all it takes is one ball running through that street, and there's a problem. I did want to ask Officer Freed tonight about speed cushions. It was something that you footnoted in the presentation, but it was kind of briefly skimmed over. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, the speed cushions or speed pillows, as they're also known, they're basically a speed hump. But as you saw in the one picture on the board there's separations between them to allow emergency vehicles to go by without doing too much harm to the emergency vehicle and not to delay them too much. There are some issues with those.
Can you tell us about the disadvantages of those versus
The one big
disadvantages of speed
disadvantage you
humps?
find there is that because it's not totally across the roadway, you have those motorists that may put one side of their car in that area where there's no speed hump, and the next thing you know, they're going through there and they're uneven. That's probably the biggest drawback of those. But again, they are designed for the bigger trucks and emergency vehicles to get through down the street without too much of a problem.
Okay. So my next question is for Dave Schramm. Could you get him and bring him up?
Good evening, Commissioner.
Hi, Dave. How are you? We got a memo from you last week saying that the fire chiefs in the township were unanimously against speed humps.
Right.
Did you ask them about speed cushions?
No. We did a brief survey. The answers came back. I put them on the report. But we are absolutely, for public safety like everybody else, and are willing to look for, as the chief said, solutions to these problems. And what the list was that we presented was the concerns. And I'm sure that the concerns can be addressed. And, if that's done, we would take another look at it.
Is that what was presented to the chiefs? Did you send a list of concerns to the chiefs, or did you let them
No,
make
I sent a list of concerns to the township manager from the chiefs.
Okay, but when I talked to one of the chiefs, he said he didn't even know what a speed cushion was.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention speed cushions, no.
But
This
that-
was a general question as to their view of, we call them speed humps, speed bumps. And I got the response back from all 5 chiefs as to their feelings. We've had some unpleasant experiences with speed bumps.
I've heard.
Right. Damage to equipment and so forth. But again, if the concept of speed cushions, and actually the other day I happened to see these things for the first time in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting concept.
They're just over the border from Springfield. I see them all the time.
Yes.
And I'm frustrated because I don't know why we're not talking about them. I've brought them up numerous times. They're a good option. They address all the concerns that we have with speed humps, but for some reason, nobody's talking about them. And I want to know why not.
If you're asking me, I don't know. I wasn't aware that...
Anybody standing at the podium, tell me why we're not talking about these things.
Yeah. I wasn't aware that they existed, but now I do, and it's an interesting concept.
I
help me
entrust the administration to research these things, so it disheartens me to hear that you don't know, you weren't aware that they existed.
I'll just comment real quick on that. They are a new concept in the area for us, something certainly not out of the realm. And just like Commissioner Rothman said, we too are looking for answers. There's nothing more frustrating than when we talk to residents and they want certain things done, and where we know fully well that our highway department's absolutely capable of doing some of these things and getting that done immediately within a short period of time, that we're kind of limited on what we can do. But we'll make every effort that we can, and certainly we can look at some of these speed cushions in certain areas. I don't know the specific parameters and requirements for speed cushions because they deal mostly with ambulances and fire trucks as far as roadway width and how they're most effective. Certainly an answer that we can get reasonably quickly enough, but we've been focusing mostly on speed humps, speed bumps, and that's been our question.
Right.
But if that's something that you want to look at for consideration, we can certainly do that and again, through different wards. Just keep in mind, though, I believe those are the more costly of the installed apparatus, I believe. Yeah, so depending on how they're installed, things like that, we'd have to talk to the highway department, but absolutely not out of the realm to consider something like that.
Mike, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
But when you look at that, I know you don't have it in front of you. Are we thinking that that is going to likely have that same, as I referenced, set of hurdles that we're looking at again? Is that like across the board? Because to me, it's a great solution. Mike and I have exchanged many emails back and forth about looking at what those things are. And they are new and they're a little more complicated, I think, because they are designed to address a lot of the concerns that our departments, including ambulance travel, reasonably has as to those concerns. But again, if we're looking at, we're asking you questions, but then at some point, we have to come up with either a new proposed set of parameters that we can see if it's permissible under current state law and all that kind of stuff. But we need to figure out a way where if 8 of us believe in a certain policy plan that we want to put together, we need to know if it's like, there's no point in Commissioner Thompson's great work on thinking these things through and finding the solution of the table he was just describing if there's almost no way with all these hurdles that we're ever going to be able to put into place. And quite frankly, I don't want you spending all your time on that kind of stuff. So if you don't have an answer for it now that it would apply the same way, please, when you look into that, figure out what the parameters for it are beyond just the cost and the size and all that.
Yeah, I could probably answer that for you, Commissioner. Anything that you see in this presentation here has to go through that same process. There's not a different process for each individual speed calming device. So when you're looking at speed calming, whether it be a hump, a cushion, a pillow, a chicane, a bulb out, it has to all go through that same process before it's considered.
Just for clarification, sorry, the RFBs too, or just the speed humps, speed bumps, speed cushions?
No, RFBs, you don't have to do that. However, you do have to get permission from PennDOT to install those.
Okay.
If we do look into the speed cushion, I think we have some other questions that you brought up about some of the other ones. Like, I understand that the trucks and the fire engines can go through that because they're wider. But I don't know that all the ambulances are now, but I guess you guys can find that out. Police cars maybe can't, so you'd have to find that out, I guess, too. And costs, we talked about that, and some of those other things, too. I know Commissioner Vahey also had some questions, and then we'll open it up past the committee.
Yeah. Can I comment real quick? Go ahead. Commissioners, I think we're all on the same, I hear the frustration. We're proposing a policy, a traffic calming policy, which would include many hurdles. But again, the manager and the commissioners, we all proposed a mechanism where we can implement experimental traffic calming measures, right? We've seen this in the past. We've seen it with stop signs in cases where, frankly, the police department did not agree. And so far, so good. But we've always taken pride, and we're risk averse, right? We know that the engineers are a lot brighter than we are, notwithstanding with your comments about, where they can improve some of the things with PennDOT. You're right. Some of these things don't apply to all cases. So we allow these experimental things in the past, and we'd certainly be flexible in the future to do that. So we can move forward, look at this traffic calming policy, which I believe is the best practices of many different departments, sort of restrictive, but we need the residents to weigh in on these things. That's 70% of residents on one street and 60% on the adjoining streets. That's the democratic process. These are your constituents, right? We have 15 commissioners. Everybody has 1 or 2 or 3 of those streets. So the calculus has to be, how much does it cost to have these cushions? And I know Commissioner Spiegelman and Commissioner Hecker at the time, we lost that young child on Rockwell, and again, we put our heads together. We were able to reduce the speed there outside what the PennDOT warrants called for, right? And I think it did slow down traffic. I don't have the post studies, but I know I go slower going down there because of some of the things that we have done. So it's not just about speed cushions, speed tables. It's about what can we do to improve the awareness, educate, and reduce speed on these streets. That was just a proposal. If you guys want to, we'll do whatever, we'll follow your direction, do our best with Manager Manfredi and the staff. But there is a mechanism already in place for us to have these experimental implementations. But what is the cost, and how do you distribute that among 15 different wards?
And put it into some following year budget. So, Commissioner Vahey.
So I apologize for what's going to be a really wonky question in the midst of a very practical debate. I do think there's something you said about uniformity in our traffic regulations. I think that's what the state has tried to achieve with their regulations. But let's just say, I'm not wild about traffic calming measures, and so Ward 12 sees no speed tables or cushions. Clearly, I think some of my colleagues would like to see them more. So what happens when one neighborhood comes populated with these devices and one neighborhood doesn't? Have you given thought to those kind of trickle-down effects?
Well, and that's why when you look at the disadvantages, one of the things is the diverted traffic to other areas. Obviously, I mean, if you want speed humps on every street, obviously you're going to find a lot more congestion in those neighborhoods, probably because vehicles got to slow down, to go over the humps and get that traffic through the streets. And again, a lot of it has to do with why this process is in place. I mean, we do speed surveys, so, this street may qualify, the street next to it may not. We talk about cut-through traffic. Again, there's parameters for that, and maybe we can play with the numbers there a little bit, but there's parameters set because not only does the state want to make sure streets are safe, but they want to make sure that the traffic keeps flowing. Because one of the disadvantages, which isn't listed on the board there, is they've come to find that the more speed humps you have, the more pollution you have in an area too, because cars are slowing down and it's causing more pollution. So it's really how you want to weigh it. And again, a lot of this is going to come down to where you can make a recommendation, but the township then is going to have to hire an engineer, and they're going to have to come out and give the final say of, what can go where if it can. So this whole process we've been using since 2008 as far as traffic calming goes. Now, we haven't used the 70% criteria. Usually when one person calls us and says, hey, I want you to look at speed humps in the street, we go out, we do the survey, look at the crashes that are related to speed. If that doesn't meet the requirements, it usually doesn't go any further than that. But, we never implemented the policy itself. But again, we've been using that as a guide for the past 11 years. And we're just trying to make it more formal now so that there's more input to what we want to have done. So.
Can Manager Manfredi? Manager.
Thank you, Lori. I hate to sound silly in this debate, but guidance documents, practices, procedures, and policies, we are dealing with something that requires scientific evidence and proof because of risk and because of liability. But we began a process of, as the Chief mentioned, of having experimentals. And one thing, a policy that's driven by statistics and numbers seems to be devoid of is common sense. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do for the last few years at least is apply strategies and tactics that allow us to be nimble, fluid, and apply common sense. The world was going to end when we put a stop sign on Rockwell and Jericho. Wasn't it Rockwell and Jericho?
That was Rockwell and Jericho.
I thought so. The world was...
The world is still present, as is Highland Farms.
And there are other locations with the experimentals that we didn't know if they would make sense or not. But I would hazard a guess that a lot of the locations that we used as experimental opportunities still remain today. And I think from my experience very recently with speed tables and speed cushions, if they're strategic, if they're well-placed, if they're limited, if they're studied, you put these things down, and they're, as you see, they're black, they're rubber, they go with bolts. The first few times Public Works will put them down, they're going to pull their hair out. After they've done it once or twice, it becomes routine, so the amount of time in putting them in is less. The reason I mention that is you can buy these things from anywhere from $8,000 to $16,000 with the signage and actually take these and move them to various locations, if that's what you choose to do, to test them out. There are various things that are options to you if you choose to want to do them. We're here to serve you, but it's your decision as to whether or not you want to do these at all. If we want to apply the statistics and the numbers and look at these as experimental, it's going to be limited. It really becomes, how do you want to...
People, you'll have to wait, sorry.
How do you want to approach this? Do you want to have the practice converted to a policy and include flexibility in the policy, or do you not? That's the simple question.
Thank you. Quick comment, and then Commissioner Gillespie.
I'm in favor of a policy in general. And Manager Manfredi used the word common sense. That uses a lot of common sense. I think my fear and a lot of the commissioners' fears would be, we use common sense, we get a petition signed, I bet you I could get 100% in favor of every resident on Church Road to install these speed bumps, because no matter what the little gray box says, everyone's traveling down the hill from Rockledge more than 45 miles an hour. My fear is that once we use our common sense, once we get 100%, the blockade is already set up from PennDOT and from other rules. And I think what I'm looking for is not so much a way around it, but an agreement and using common sense, again, common sense, to know that this is a problem and your rules aren't factoring in on Abington Township's pedestrians, children, and our safety issues, and they need to be obsoleted in certain situations. So I would move forward with this policy, no doubt about it, if we had, if we had the ability to address all that and, I don't know, fight it. Fight it out with PennDOT in every aspect. Because, again, 4 major PennDOT roads running through, and every one of my complaints, every complaint that I get from every neighbor is there's speeding. We can't cross the street. And we can't put speed humps. So policy, yes. Common sense, yes. If there's 100% buy-in, then yes, let's approve it.
Yep. Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was really well done. And Officer Freed, you have presented this, I know, to Ward 13 a few times over the years. I just have a question, and you kind of covered it, Commissioner DiPlacido, when you talked about Jenkintown, because they do park all over those bumps there. And it really, I don't think they should be able to just be sitting right on them. And how would you, how would you patrol that? I mean, it's just another thing you have to write a ticket for?
That's more or less correct. You would have to write a ticket because you're not supposed to be able to park within 30 feet of any traffic control device.
Right,
So-
I know
so
that from over the years.
It would be a ticket.
And will you have signs that say you can't park within 30 feet of this, or no parking, or you said there's already going to be signs on?
Yeah, there's going to be signs for the speed humps themselves. And I mean, again, that would be up to each individual commissioner. If you wanted some kind of signage to say no parking, putting no parking signs up for that 30 feet or whatever it may be, that would be up to you. There's nothing to say that you can't do that. It's just not in any of the policies that you need to put signage as far as the no parking. But, you know, in the manuals and in the vehicle code, you're not allowed to park within 30 feet.
And I didn't know that from over the
traffic
years.
control device.
And the liability, that's all on us, that's all on the township, right? If
That would- that would
somebody
be,
tries to
yes.
steer over one of those and goes up over somebody's lawn, whose responsibility is that?
Right, if you look at the traffic calming policy, we would be liable for anything that's not set up as per the procedure. So if something were to happen and we didn't set it up as per what the procedure says, then we would be liable for that.
It's just so hard to get these people to slow down. I mean, I understand everyone's frustration. We all have it. We all have it. I have Jenkintown Road. Matt, you have Jenkintown Road. And I have the bend where they go up on people's lawns. So, okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Commissioner Klein.
So you talked about 70%. 70% of who? The residents, 70% of the tenants, 70% of the property owners? Who are you polling?
It would be the people who actually live along that stretch of roadway. So in the case of a renter, the person who rents the property would have to be the one to say, yeah, I want it, no, I don't. And then whatever the residents.
Not the property owner?
What's that?
Not the property owner that would potentially have some ill effect to their
Well,
property value?
whoever the
if
property
that's-
owner is, and
If that
when I
becomes
said
the
renter,
issue?
I was assuming that the renter was the property owner. So it would be whoever, the residents that own their homes and the property owners, if there's rental properties there, and whatever businesses it may be. It would have to be 70%
So it's
consent.
whoever's occupying the property, not the person who owns the property?
Person who owns the property would have the vote,
Okay.
so.
And is it 70% of respondents or 70% of total property owners?
So 70% of the total property owners that are on the street.
And what happens if you don't get enough respondents?
Well, if you don't get the 70%, then
I
the
mean,
project.
let's say you had 10 people on the street and
Right, then
6 of them respond and say they want it.
Yeah, the project wouldn't move forward because you would have to have the 70%.
So you would have to somebody would have to go out and get those respondents to come through.
Right, and the way the policy's set up, it's whoever wants to take the lead as far as whether it's a resident on the block that's requesting the speed hump, they would be required to take that petition around and get it signed by everybody else.
Traffic diversion. Is there anything in the policy that would require some traffic volume studies of surrounding streets that may be looking to get one of these traffic calming measures installed?
There's nothing specific as far as a parallel street, but they would just follow whatever the procedure was for the street requesting the speed hump.
Okay. I mean, I would strongly suggest that something like that gets written into policy, that if speed humps or speed cushions, whatever they may be, get put in at surrounding streets that could be affected through the diverted traffic patterns, that their traffic volumes should also be counted at the time before those measures are put in. I mean, I know my aunt lives on Guernsey between Old York Road and Huntington, and they've seen an increase in traffic since the red light cameras went up on Guernsey. So I would only imagine, and I know from I go through the city of Philadelphia and in Wissahickon and Mount Airy and Chestnut Hill area, and I know all the streets that have speed humps, and I don't go on them. So I'm sure there's plenty of people similar that find ways to get around them.
That's something we can look into. That's not a problem.
The one traffic calming measure you didn't talk about was bike lanes or bike facilities on the streets. And I know there's some limits to those only because of space. But those have also been proven to be traffic calming measures when you tighten up the lanes, put in bike facilities on the roadway. We've seen it on Valley Road where the average, the 85th percentile has either stayed stagnant or have come down depending on when we've taken the speed studies. So I think something that should also be part of the consideration. We have a master bike plan. There are plenty of streets that have been designated for bike facilities, and those have been proven not just, in our in our small amount of experience in Abington, but throughout the state as being, and throughout the country as being effective traffic calming measures. So I think that's something that should also be considered. Curbing, if a roadway doesn't, I mean, the pictures you're showing up here, all these streets have curbing. If a street does not have curbing, is that disqualify it from putting up any of these facilities because it diverts stormwater onto those neighboring properties?
Well, again, I think that would be up to the board, how they would want to handle that. That's just put into policy because that's some of the issues that have been seen in other areas. Places that don't have curbs, you know, there could be water runoff problems. The bigger issue was that cars would go around the speed hump by using your front lawn to go around the speed hump. So it's in the policy. If the Board of Commissioners wants that changed somehow or something.
What's in the policy? What's in the policy?
Curbing, that curbing
Oh,
is
okay.
suggested.
Sorry.
So,
Yeah, because I mean, Woodland Road, where Penn State is, I mean, people would love to have speed humps there, but every one of the properties on the low end of the pitch on the road would be flooded because they don't have storm drains to begin with, and everything would just fly into those properties.
right.
So depending on which way you're curving on that land, on that roadway. We didn't talk about plowing, and we didn't hear from Public Works about their thoughts on how the plowing would be affected. And then another question for Public Works would be, what's the process of installing, more on a technical a technical idea, what's the process to install these plastic pieces?
Well, I believe there's different methods of installing them depending on what you buy. Obviously, you just don't put a pile of blacktop there and level it off. Some of these, like the manager said, are bolted in. I imagine some of the other ones we would have to grind out the roadway and lock in that asphalt, and then obviously put some kind of pavement markings to warn the cars that are coming down, the vehicles. As far as snow plowing, I did a little survey of our surrounding communities and public people in Public Works, and they all don't like them because when you go over with a plow tends to float up and down. When you hit a bump like that, it's going to leave snow. It's not going to clean it down to the bare pavement as good as a flat road. So that's, on a Public Works aspect, that's why we wouldn't want them, because it leaves snow build up, ice, then it creates another set of hazards for motorists that are driving.
And how about you had talked about the install, and we went back and forth with some of these numbers, and you had a high and a low. What's the variable there? You had some of them say between $5,000 and $15,000. Is it $5,000 or $15,000 per line, or $5,000 or $15,000 per road that you would put them on? Because in most cases, you're not talking about just one section, you're talking about multiple sections.
It would be per line. So it all depends on what you would need to have done. Certain materials you may have to use at different places. So it would depend on what materials you use, and it would depend on what preparations you would have to make for drainage. That's why the fluctuation in the price. Because obviously not every roadway is the same, with the widths and sight distances and that kind of thing. And again, that's another issue to look at, is that, if you approve speed humps on a certain road, that would require you to hire an engineer to come in, and that engineer would have to map out exactly where they go and what would have to be done there. Because it may be that a resident at one end of the street says, oh, I want speed humps down here, but the engineer may come out and say, well, we can't put them here for whatever reason, and it gets moved down to some other portion of the street. So that's something to take into consideration too.
What's the process for, is there something in the procedure that would also allow residents to get rid of a traffic calming measure? I mean, you talked about some of the issues that would be problematic. Have you given that some thought? Would it be the same process?
As far as what, having them removed?
Yeah.
I would imagine it would be some kind of a similar process that the majority of the residents on the street would have to come up with, and say that there was an issue of why they didn't want them there. And then it would go from there, just like the policy says here, to put them in.
And last question I have is along the budget conversation. You talked about, so let's say we're talking about between $5,000 and $15,000 we have discussed. So how many of, we have 15 wards, how many of these potential traffic calming measures would you see right off the bat in your travels, in your list that you already know of, would probably be looked to get implemented? And taking into account that some of those wouldn't get 70% buy-in.
Right, yeah, and I guess you're talking about as far as what we've seen as far as surveys and data and that kind of thing?
Well, it's easy, yeah, I mean, it's easy to talk about easy to talk about $5,000 to $15,000 per speed hump, but what's the magnitude are we talking about? Are we talking about 30 locations? Are we talking about 10 locations? Is it any of those numbers over a year? I mean, what's the number if this was implemented to somebody? I mean, somebody must have given it some thought. I know, Commissioner Rothman, we've all had streets that we've inquired about, so you must have some idea of how many situations and how many of these speed humps might be looked to be installed in the early stages of the policy. Sure.
Given the amount of money that we have budgeted and the requests for other types of traffic calming and the process we already have in place for signage and stop signs, et cetera, I would think that in this fiscal year, depending upon what the application is, whether it's a speed cushion, is it a narrow road, a wide road, I can't imagine that you'd be able to purchase any more than 2 of these in this fiscal year.
So you're talking about $20,000 to $30,000?
I think, depending upon the width of the road, my experience has been when you consider not just the cushion itself or the table and the signage that has to go in with it, you're going to be closer to $15,000 range.
Okay, but that's this year. You're going to get this policy, and then what's the projection for the next year?
Well, that was kind of
What's
the point I was trying to
projection for the
make
year
about
after
common
that?
sense.
I'm sorry, say that again?
That was the point I was trying to make about common sense. That, it's one thing to say we're going to adopt a policy, but just because you have a policy doesn't necessarily mean that you don't build into the policy the fact that you can't afford to put these everywhere. I mean, when we did the budget last year, I believe it was Commissioner Schreiber in particular, when we had this discussion, we limited the amount of money that each commissioner had in engineering to assure that that didn't happen. So you would apply certain parameters and standards with this applicant as you would there.
Wait, I had money in engineering that I didn't use yet?
You get my point. I mean,
I used yours.
We'll talk afterwards.
Sorry, man, I used yours.
I guess my point is, with the monies that were budgeted for this year, I think it was 60,000, Chris, is that stick? In what we've already committed to with various commissioner requests for the speed boards and stop signs and the monies we have set aside should those come in. As you know, we had a flurry of requests for experimental in the very beginning, and now, like all things, it tends to taper off. I think the key going forward with respect to traffic calming devices, whether it be, again, we keep talking about speed tables, speed cushions, whether it's a rapid flashing beacon, whether it is a bump out, whether it is curbing, a bike lane, whatever it might be, you're going to have to analyze each particular case in each request by each ward, apply the guidelines and practices that might be part of a policy, but you also have to build into that policy those scenarios where we can deploy the standards whereby we put stop signs in. So where you do have the experimentals.
So forgetting about this year, because we're in the middle of June and only have 6.5 months left in the year, if you were projecting out and this policy went into place, would you be thinking that you're going to need X amount of dollars? What's that number that anybody would think to budget for traffic calming measures going forward on a yearly basis?
It depends. And the reason I say that is this. So let's just say the board decided that they want to have one table with all the appropriate signage and lighting that would be on a roadway that is fairly wide. I would estimate that we should probably reserve $20,000 for that, because these things are vibram, and they do get bolted down, and they do get broken not only from snow plows, but from cars and trucks going over them, or bolts will crack, so you have to replace the bolts and you take the pieces out. It's something that doesn't just go down and then it stays there forever. My thinking would be that once we have a few of these plastic, or not plastic, it's a hard plastic, that you would eventually convert them over to actual blacktop, where you would build them right into the roadway as a table, and then you become more proficient at it.
So are you considering that these plastic ones are only temporary?
I wouldn't recommend that we start deploying the non-asphalt material as structurally built, because they do break. Absolutely. I think they are in some locations, like when you're talking about the cushions where they're more flat, for ambulance or fire trucks, they tend to have a longer life. Mm-hmm. But the places where you deploy them, where there's higher traffic volumes, you'll find, especially if there's truck traffic, that you're replacing them more frequently.
Right.
So if you're replacing them more frequently, I would think, again, the application of common sense, you would remove them and physically build it into the roadway if they're going to stay there for a period of time. And this
All right,
is...
so we're talking about two line items. We're talking about a capital line item of actually installing traffic calming measures, and then we're talking about an ongoing maintenance budget of these traffic calming measures.
Yeah, you would be adding the labor and blacktop cost, yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Correct.
what are we projecting as those numbers?
I have no idea,
Okay.
because we haven't even begun to study it.
That would be something I'd be interested in. Thank you.
I have a quick question, and then I know that Commissioner Spiegelman was next. And I know there's a lot of people here that want to make comments, and we don't want to be here all night, too. So my quick question is, I know you've said you studied some other municipalities. Have there been ones that have put them in and then just taken them all out, decided it wasn't a good policy, it wasn't a good idea? Are there local ones around here that are... Or maybe you don't know the answer to that, but that's my quick question, and then it'll be Commissioner Spiegelman after you answer.
The two municipalities that I know of where they've been put in, one is the city of Philadelphia. There was a neighborhood where they were put in. Eventually, the neighbors, because of the noise and that type of thing, wanted them out. I don't think they removed all of them, but they removed some of them. The same, I believe, in Upper Gwinnett Township. There was a neighborhood that wanted the speed humps, and a year or two later, the neighbors got tired of the noise and the vehicles speeding up between the humps, and after they crossed over the humps and felt that they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So I think they petitioned to have the board remove them, and I believe in that case also they removed some of them, but not all of them.
Thank you, Commissioner Schreiber. Just with regard to the speed cushions, I believe I've seen at some of the areas around Abington Hospital, the driveways approaching the emergency room, the trauma center, there are speed cushions that are just the right width to accommodate, ambulance axle widths. Those seem to work. Just fine if anyone wants to check them out. Question about speed cushions, and then just a general comment. With regard to speed cushions, because of how they're laid out, I would think maybe you wouldn't have quite as many problems as far as drainage. And is there the same curbing requirement, because they don't go all the way to anything? They just sit there in the middle.
Yeah, I'm not sure about having the same type problems or not. as far as the cushion goes, but the curbing requirement is still recommended that there be curbs there, because you still run into the same issue.
Okay. Just sort of the general comment, and Al, I know you and I have had this conversation for a very, very long time about issues like this. I mean, what I think most people are here for, the two issues that we all hear about, I know I hear about the most, are speeds and blowing stop signs. And those are both basically subject in many ways to the no cop, no stop mentality. Those are laws that we, are all expected to follow to sort of maintain, safe streets and a civil society, but they're hard to enforce. I mean, we don't have, as expensive as speed cushions and everything else we're talking about, if we added 50 or 60 officers to the department in order to have enough to really enforce all this stuff, I mean, that would be significantly more expensive. I don't think the folks who came out or the folks that we all hear from have this particular fixation with speed humps, bumps, tables, whatever. I think the reason people mention them is because they've become such an exotic notion, because it is so difficult, it has proven so difficult to try to get any. And I don't think anyone is thinking, what I really want is a speed hump outside my house. That's my dream. What they want is to be able to feel safe going outside, walking the dog during rush hour, or having their kids walk to school, or just, like we did. I remember, when we were teaching our daughter to walk along Edge Hill Road, teaching her very early on that, cars are scary and dangerous and they go awfully fast. Ultimately, I mean, obviously there are some barriers, there are some issues, the noise, et cetera, and the costs and the issues with plowing, to a lot of these measures. Maybe speed cushions less than the others, and I, like Commissioner Thompson, am very enamored of looking into that particular traffic calming measure. But there are also sort of a lot of non-starters. It's definitely become a non-starter to tell people that, I know, you're very concerned about your street, but there was a speed survey, and you'd be surprised to see, really, people aren't speeding, so it's okay. Don't worry. They don't really care about the numbers. They care about whether or not they physically feel safe with their kids, whether they physically feel safe walking, they physically feel safe with an older person crossing the street. It's not that they don't believe the numbers, it's that where they live, people are going too fast for them to be comfortable in their own neighborhoods. And I know, not anecdotally, people have actually told me, I can name a couple of people who used to be residents that I represented, and they moved away from streets where they were otherwise happy, specifically because of these concerns. Not again, they specifically said that. So, I don't know if the way to go is something a little more draconian, something I've been pushing for, which is pretty controversial, which, the antidote to, the ultimate antidote to the no cop, no stop mentality, and again, that applies to speed as well, is something we have that I know has been, at least among some, controversial. We have red light cameras. There are states and countries that have speed cameras and stop sign cameras. And I don't know if maybe we want to try to get into a pilot program, that way. It is very Big Brother, but it has been shown to work. But as Commissioner Rothman and others have said, we have to do something. Maybe there's something we can try that PennDOT hasn't either specifically forbidden or sanctioned. Some out-of-the-box Abington thinking, something we can come up with. But again, echoing Commissioner Rothman, we do have to do something. Thank you.
Commissioner Myers.
Thank you. I have early on had a lot of experience with speed bumps, long before we ever knew of speed cushions. And the townhouse complex that I live in, although a private road, so we weren't subject to all of these regulations. When I moved in, we had speed bumps, and found out after several years of having them that the residents didn't want them anymore because of all the reasons that were mentioned, And one that really wasn't mentioned is the trucks, just delivery trucks, banging over them, hitting the air brakes quickly to stop before them. And we also had the problem, because we do not have curbs, of cars going around them on the grass. So there are problems with that. When it came time to re-asphalt the road, unanimously, the residents asked for them not to be put back in. So it's a little bit of be careful what you ask for. I'm still a little old-fashioned. I believe in enforcement. I believe that we do notice people speeding on the streets where we live or we walk, but then we get in our cars and we speed on their streets and their streets where they walk. So I think enforcement is huge, because we want speed control on our street, but we're not so careful about speed control on their street. And I, for one, and I don't want to speak for everyone in this room, but I would take a bet that I don't think anyone in this room always goes the speed limit. I could be wrong. Not sure. But wait, I do have one question. Has there been, in fact, Carol, you would be best to answer this. Has there been any kind of study that a road that has speed humps, speed bumps, speed cushions, does that affect property value? Because it would seem to me that a resident, someone new looking at a home or looking at the street and seeing this might just have an extra concern about buying a house on that street. Have you know anything about that?
Not because mostly around here we don't have any, so.
Oh, well, that would be a good reason.
Since we don't have any around here, I don't have, and I have not sold a property near.
And just one other point, because this just happened to me. I, a little over a week ago, unfortunately had the occasion to have to call for an ambulance. And when you're waiting for an ambulance, seconds feel like minutes. I wouldn't have wanted them to come 5 seconds later than they did. And I think that had there been on Fitzwatertown Road, that I know that's a state road, that wouldn't have it, but on any road to get to my home, that if anything that would have slowed them down, I wouldn't want that. So it's something else to consider.
Oops, I'm off here. Commissioner Carswell.
So at the very beginning of your presentation, one of the things you said was that 25 to 35 miles per hour is not considered excessive. And I've seen some of that in some of the literature that's out there. I find that concerning, because when you drive in my neighborhood where it's all residential, or you drive over where Spiegelman lives, or Rothman lives, or Klein lives, when it's houses on both sides of the road, or a school, or a park, 35 miles per hour feels excessive to me, whether I'm a pedestrian or in a car. I understand that there's a lot of limitations here, but I think we have talked about, and it's not necessarily something that we've put in as a policy, but we've maybe had visionary comments here about being a walkable community. And I think we've all seen the benefits of being a walkable community. But I don't think we have any chance of being one when pedestrians are intimidated, when children can't walk 2 blocks to their neighbor's house to go, call on Johnny to come out and play because they can't cross the street there. The path from my house to my son's elementary school crosses 2 roads. And only one of them has a crossing guard. The other one, it's a matter of the kids banding together and being enough of a visible presence that someone doesn't come flying down the hill and hit them. So there's a lot of actions that we as neighbors have taken to help our kids get places, which means getting in a car or having, coordinating walking parties to get them places. And I think that we can do more than speed humps, and we can do more than speed cushions, and we can do more than stop signs. I'm glad that we, prior to my becoming a member of this board, started an experimental project. And don't get me wrong, you're probably going to have a number of emails from me and others tonight about adding to that list. But I think that we need to do more on this. I think I'm not a member of this committee, but I would happily roll up my sleeves and participate in figuring out what that looks like. And I think that there's a lot of people in this room that have shown up tonight and who've done this work for years and who are here at the table that want to do that work. So I hope that we don't stop with this meeting, and I hope we don't stop with this draft. I hope this moves forward. I want to really see some solutions, and I think that the right people are in the room. We just need to keep the conversation going.
Okay, we're going to open it up to the residents. If you gentlemen want to have a seat, because I think there might be some questions. I don't know, do we want you at the table over here? Is that easier, so you're on a microphone? Sorry, I should have been more clear when I said have a seat. So, we were going to talk about brake retards. So are we going to do that as a presentation, or how is?
Completely up to you. If you want to touch this topic and then touch that topic, or if you want to do both.
Yeah, okay. So what we're going to do is open this up for residents, because I know you've been sitting very patiently waiting. If you have a comment, we do have a 3-minute rule. You have to identify yourself by name and address when you come up to the microphone. Your 3 minutes, there is a timer that you can see right there. It changes to yellow at 30 seconds? No, 1 minute. I'm not even sure. 30. And then there's a countdown in red. You'll see it. And yeah, we're going to put a stop sign on. Is that what you said? Oh, okay. See? But now we can try. We're going to have a traffic calming measure right in here, so you can look at that. And yeah, so if you're interested in making a comment, come on up. And again, your name and address, please.
Sure. How you doing? Hello? Can you hear me? This one? How you doing? My name is Nick Masonic, 301 Heathcliff Road, Huntington Valley. And not much of a speaker. I'm sorry if I don't come across the right way, but it is what it is. I got, my street, Heathcliff, comes off of Rockledge Ave. It actually is Rockledge, starts with Reese, and turns into Heathcliff, and it's a blind corner. So it's a blind corner that goes into a big flat area where all the kids play and then goes up a hill. And I understand, I know you can't, 5,000 people ask for a speed bump, you can't do 5,000 speed bumps. But whatever you could do to help whoever asks, we truly appreciate. And all we want to do is care for our kids and help whoever we can. I got 3 neighbors here with me. Between just the 4 houses, we have 16 kids. I have 5, neighbor has 6, we have 3, 2. Then besides that, there's another, say 20 kids that are playing out all the time, and we've had multiple close calls. And I understand that we're there to watch our kids all the time, but just like officers, they can't stop every bad person. We can't be there to watch everything that happens with our kids because sometimes they slip away. We try our best. It's not easy. They're young. They're fast. I have one that's really fast. Is what it is. But we do the best we can to take care of it. What I'm asking is, I would ask for a speed bump in front of my house with flashing lights, whatever it takes, and I could get 90% of my neighborhood to go for it, because it's what we want, it's what we need, and there's been too many close calls. In 16 years, I've seen 1 fire truck come down our street. Thank God. I don't want any more. I wouldn't want to see any more. Like you said, you don't want anybody to slow down the process of, someone being saved. Emergencies, absolutely. But when we have hundreds of people coming down the street fast, hundreds, we've asked for years for this, hundreds. There's too many close calls for that one emergency. And I understand there may be more emergencies, but there's one emergency that I've seen in 16 years compared to The 20 kids or 16 kids in my 4 houses, I got 6 kids to the left, and I got another, like I said, 18 to 20 kids up to the top of the street. My time is running out, I see that, but we have multiple kids, we have a blind spot. I don't even want two, they say you need 2 these speed bumps. I'll take 1, just 1 on the blind corner, just to help us out. 2 will be great, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know what that was. And I think that you are a very good speaker, so don't put yourself down next time you come up to the podium. I'm just going to make a suggestion. If you have particular streets other than that, which is great, that maybe you want to make sure that you contact your commissioner, and Officer Freed, I think, is writing down the particulars so that you can have maybe a little meeting right at that particular intersection, or any other, if anybody else is getting up about a particular street. That, you know, I'm sure, I know I've had Officer Freed come out to particular streets in my ward, and I'm sure we all have, so thank you. Okay, is there anybody who would like to get, anybody else from the audience that would like to get up? And again, name and address for the record, please.
My name is Andrew McLean. I live at 467 Hamel. I understand that, you know, we're about to talk about speed humps, but one of my major concerns is all-way stop signs. I grew up in Philly. Every corner's got a stop sign. You have to stop at all sides. Hamel and Spruce intersection at the end of the corner, the bus stop comes there. You only have to stop going straight down Hamel. You don't have to stop coming down Spruce. So a lot of times people are making wide turns and just flying down the block. I mean, I stop at the corner no matter what, just because that's what I'm used to, 36 years in Philly. I mean, I'm a little nervous, I'm sorry. So I just wonder if there's a way that we could, you know, maybe turn some of the stop signs into, the corners into 4-way stop signs, because that could also, you know, deter traffic from coming around the corner faster, because now they have to slow down. They're not turning the corner at 35, 40 miles an hour. I mean, that's just my biggest concern. I mean, that's all I have. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we didn't talk about 4-way stops. That I'm glad you brought that up, because that is another traffic calming measure that maybe we should address at some point too. Thank you. Anybody else that? Mr. Bell, you know the procedure. Name and address.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Raymond Bell, 2076 Parkview Avenue. I just have 2 things. I'll try to be brief. In the petition that I saw to distribute and sign, obviously you're familiar with federal and state laws to protect personal information. And when you're getting names, address, and telephone numbers, and you have someone going out and getting the signatures, then I believe that you may be putting that person at risk to Federal Trade Commission or state or federal laws. I don't know whether you looked at that, but I would have a concern. For example, if you have someone distributing this petition, are they assuring that the petition's genuine, the signature's genuine, it's head of the household, you know, and phone number? What if that person loses that document? You know, I think you need to, if you haven't, you might want to ask your township solicitor about the federal and state laws governing privacy. Second of all, let me just say that Officer Freed, Posey, have been very diligent in relation to traffic control, traffic calming. He hasn't visited my home for a while, but let me just say that the question I have, do they have enough people to enforce the law? You know, we're talking about speed bumps and, you know, we have to enforce the law. Do they have enough police officers to police and enforce the township codes and laws? And if they don't, we need to, I think, examine that. You know, now the thing, if anyone hasn't noticed that traffic has increased. I live on Parkview and Lycoming, and it's adventure because everybody's cutting through, not one, but three roads, three lanes. And they're bowling up, not stopping for the stop sign. Right. I wish the hell I could enforce the law, but they won't let me. but I do concern the safety of people in the neighborhood when I see kids riding the bikes and what have you. Last but not least is now there's another thing the traffic's coming. The new muffler systems on cars that sound like a rocket ship. You know, I don't know where they buy these things, but that noise level is absolutely atrocious. But cutting through is going to be the price you have to pay. But I would examine the fact that when you're putting the traffic controls in, enforce the law, give them more. If they need more people, get more police officers. That's it, bottom line. Hell with this stuff. Get the police officers and enforce the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Sorry for the profanity.
Hi, I'm Malika Davidson. I live at Horace and Bacchius Avenue, just right here at the hospital. And I basically just wanted to point out, well, first I'll say, John, when you said about Washington, D.C., I'm from Washington, D.C. And one thing you know is when you cross into the border from Maryland or Virginia into D.C., you slow down. Why? Because there's speed cameras. So I just wanted to say they work. My grandmother doesn't care for them, but they work. In terms of Bacchius Avenue, we also have a lot of children on our block. And what we end up doing as parents is whenever there's a child outside, I have a 9-year-old and I have a 1-year-old daughter. Whenever there's a child outside, there's always a parent. And that parent will literally stand in the middle of the street when a car is speeding down in order to slow them down. What has happened, unfortunately, is that an individual coming down the street was upset that we blocked the street off. Got out, got into a confrontation with the parent. Police ultimately ended up having to come. No one was hurt, no one was assaulted, but words were exchanged. So the point is that the speed measures need to be implemented. We need them in order to keep our children safe. The last thing that anyone wants is to what have happened with that young child that happened on Rockwell. No one wants to see that happen in Abington again. So whatever needs to be done, the practice that has been in place for the last 11 years obviously has not worked. So converting that into the exact policy that you're trying to implement is not going to work. Changes need to be made to that practice in order to make it an effective policy. And so if we can all kind of come together to meet in the middle to make that happen, but I would highly suggest, or at least put out there, that converting that practice to a policy as it stands clearly is not going to change anything if it hasn't worked for the last 11 years that it's been in place.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else from the audience want to?
My name's Dan Rittler, 227 Shady Lane. I've lived through this process. It doesn't work. And you're going to formalize it based on the way it was presented tonight. There's a 114-page traffic calming manual on the statement. It doesn't limit itself to traffic humps. It covers all across the board. You guys really need to take the time, read the beginning of that manual. I live it every day. I've watched volume of traffic go up, triple in 20 years. Every time a new traffic light goes on 232, my traffic goes on Shady Lane. Truck traffic, tractor trailers. And when we got to the process, we were approved for a hump, but it was overruled. The people on my street have touched on everything you guys have talked about. Noise of humps, walkability. It got us nowhere. Please take the time and look at the 114 pages. You don't have to limit it to traffic humps. The people really, really need it. I live on a street with a park, and we've got people that come out of the park, have never been there before, on bicycles. They come right up our street. There's no sidewalk, there's no curb, but we didn't qualify for any traffic calming. Please, take the time, consider it. I know change is hard for every one of us, but just because we've never done it before, we can. Abington is a great township, and I'm very proud to live here. And I really appreciate the opportunity that you've given us to speak and listen to how you operate. Please, for the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Mike McPaul, 1833 Brentwood Road, also a member of the Abington's Economic Development Board Committee. I guess a couple of statements and a question. Invited many of my neighbors to come today, and their comment was, nothing will happen. Too many times, too many meetings, too many same old, nothing's going to happen. I guess question for, I guess related to the procedure, if I understood it correctly, 85% of, I guess, the traffic measured has to be going over 10 miles over the speed limit to qualify? Did I understand that correctly?
No, that's not correct. The 85th percentile speed is what we use to determine the signage and the speed limit and that sort of thing. What we look at when we look at traffic calming, that 85th percentile speed is 85% of the traffic is traveling at or below. So whatever traffic is over 10 miles an hour or more over that 85th percentile speed is what we look at to qualify a street for any traffic calming.
Okay. And I guess as a follow-up to the comment the gentleman made related to stop signs, does anyone have a sense of what a stop sign costs relative to all these other measures?
A regular stop sign, like
Regular
not
old
the one
stop
with the
sign.
lights.
No, just a regular old stop sign.
Not much. Does
We
anybody
make
want to
them.
answer
I
that?
mean, the Public Works Department's they have a sign shop, so.
Right? Somebody makes them, somebody sticks them in the ground, somebody puts the line on the street, done. From an economic perspective, I would bet that half the people here would be happy to get a stop sign and would solve many of the problems we're talking about in a much cheaper fashion. Because if we have 2 speed humps potentially in the budget for this year, I can't imagine we have 100 to satisfy these folks for the subsequent year. And I think a stop sign and a little bit more liberal use of them would go a lot further. And in the past, I've been a proponent of one in front of my house for about 10 years and have not won that battle. So I would like the board to potentially consider that, because I understand there's some hurdles, and maybe those hurdles are a lot easier to lower than some of the other PennDOT hurdles we're referring to for speed humps and others. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Does anybody else from the public have any comments?
Thank you for this opportunity to address you. My name is George Beetham. I live at 2819 Mount Carmel Avenue, which is very close to Limekiln Pike. And I've observed for probably the last 3 or 4 years that the police department has done a tremendous job of targeting speeders coming down Limekiln Pike from Edge Hill. And they're traveling down there at speeds like the British Army is after them. I don't know how many citations are issued along Limekiln Pike in that area, but it seems to me there must be an awful lot of repeat offenders because of the number of sirens that I hear. I think this leads to the next issue, which is enforcement, which hasn't really been addressed too much here. And I think the gentleman who said we need more police officers probably touched on a good solution to the problem. But on Limekiln Pike, they enforce there an awful lot. And that has not significantly changed the behavior of motorists coming down Limekiln Pike. And I don't know what the answer is for that. I mean, do you hang them from a tree, vigilante justice, or what? If you issue them a ticket and it costs them money, you would think they would make people learn. But enforcement is the issue, and I think that leads to the next issue, which is changing drivers' habits. And that's not unique to Abington, that's all over this country. Thank you.
I think with that comment, we kind of went full circle. If you remember at the beginning, we talked about education, and I said, what are we doing about education? I think you're absolutely right.
Yes.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public?
Yeah, hi, Drew Warape, 1828 Brentwood Road, neighbors with Mr. McPaul. I've been fighting the stop sign battle for about 15 years. So I agree with Mr. McPaul that it's probably a cheaper alternative if we're lowering the bar or we're looking for experimental ways. But in particular on my street, I call Brentwood Road the Brentwood Speedway. It's a bit of a triple threat. You have Penn State Abington, students running late to class in the morning, students excited to get out of class in the evening, and I challenge any one of you to come sit outside my house at 7 p.m. and you'll see cars doing 50, 60 miles per hour. And I don't think the police can enforce the VASCAR lines at that time of night. Correct me, is that true, that the VASCAR lines cannot be enforced at nighttime?
They are difficult at nighttime for our officers to enforce. The AccuTrack lines is what we call those, yeah.
So there are VASCAR lines on our street. I just don't think they can be targeted at certain times, but they can't get all they can't be enforced at all the times. The other two threats are the hospital and the Target. So that's just, the hospital seems to be growing. I see the same people every morning as I'm taking my kids to the bus stop, either fighting with the bus, trying to get around the bus. I've seen people pass the bus with the red lights on. The same people. Now, I think people try to obey the rules, but there's always the student, the outlier student or the outlier hospital worker who just has to get to work or class faster than we would like. So that's the triple threat. So back to education, that's the one point I wanted to stress was Commissioner Hecker, he recommended, when he was in our ward a few years ago, he recommended meeting with Penn State and having an education session with them and stating that, hey, you're cruising through residential areas, watch your speed. So unfortunately, that never came to fruition. So I would like to, present that to Mrs. Carswell, and perhaps we meet with the hospital, perhaps we meet with Penn State, and get some education points there. And maybe there's some signage that we could use in our favor. Hey, you're entering a residential area. And the last but not least, I've seen other towns use restricted signs as far as timing. You can't go down the street during certain times. I haven't heard any discussion around that. Is that something that's on the table?
Thank you for the comment, and you're right, we did not talk about that, and that has come up in some of our smaller meetings, but we didn't address that this evening, so maybe if we have a further workshop in the future, that is a good one to put on. Like, we didn't talk about the four-way stops, and maybe we can also talk about restricted times as a possibility in the future.
Commissioner Schreiber, can I make one comment about the last speaker? So Penn State does allow for the police department to come in at the beginning of each semester and during orientation to say exactly what you said. And Penn State also contributes $30,000 a year for police overtime to do traffic enforcement in Penn State's area. Is that still the case, right?
It's very similar. It's
Yeah, that's been going on for quite a few years at this point. So Penn State does contribute and does work with the police department in that sense. Thank you.
For anybody else from the public would like to speak?
Tom Finley, 1508 Huntington. I noticed one day on Horace Avenue coming down from Briarbush, police were mounting a box on a pole. And that box showed me my speed. And I just instinctively, when I see that and it's blinking at me because I'm a little over, I slow down. And I heard those things are a lot cheaper than these. So perhaps those things could actually be deployed in greater numbers. I don't know that they'll work. I don't know if that's true, but my own observation. Also, if they're using those to compile the data for that 85% rule, as I said, I slow down. If they're on there and I can see my speed, I'm able to slow down, and that skews the data. So maybe if you're collecting that data, you want to do it in a more stealthful fashion. Don't display the speed, just have the box there. Secondly, on the topic of stop signs, I've also noticed an increase in stop signs. I agree, if we put stop signs on every single corner, that'll calm traffic, because then it's impossible to accelerate to speed, et cetera, et cetera. However, I don't want to spend 20 minutes just to get out of Abington because I have to stop at every single stop sign. And also, as Officer Freed pointed out, even with these other devices, there's a pollution factor. Well, starting from a dead stop contributes much more to pollution than having to decelerate just for something like a speed bump. So I'm not really in favor of the great proliferation of stop signs without getting into all specific examples. Finally, crossing Old York Road as a pedestrian, that is an absolute adventure every single time. Now, I know there are the switches, the push buttons, that light up the nice little white picture of the person and say, oh, it's safe to cross now. However, at every single cross street, the light also turns green. So I still have to watch, and there's still people who rip around, and it's hazardous. So I have a suggestion. I don't know if it could be implemented, but when a pedestrian activates one of those crossing signs, is it possible, I know it's a state road, but is it possible to delay the light turning green on the cross streets until the pedestrian is given time to cross? Because that's really a big concern. Truly, it's an adventure every time I try to cross Old York Road as a pedestrian. Thank you.
I'm not sure if that's possible or not, but we can certainly look at that. And I was past one of those boxes today, and I did slow down when I went, so I do the same thing as you. Anybody else from the public?
Commissioner Schreiber, can I just make one quick comment? I'm pretty sure, and I know, I'm sure Al will correct me if I'm wrong, when the official speed surveys are done, those use the stealth boxes, right? Those use the little tiny black boxes that are hard to see, right? You don't do the official survey with the display box, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Even though we collect data with those display boxes, when we do a survey for signage or speed limit or anything like that, we use, it's basically almost the size of an oversized lunchbox. It's black, hangs on a telephone pole. You don't really know it's there unless you're really looking for it. So it takes the place of the old rubber tubes across the road. So.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other comments from the public, I know we want to address the break. I don't know who's speaking on that. Are you speaking on that?
Commissioner Thompson?
I can speak briefly on that. We had a few concerns lately, and a resident from Mount Carmel is here with us tonight to actually address it a little bit. But over on Ward 6, we do have Mount Carmel Avenue, which connects a large area of Cheltenham and Abington to the Pennsylvania Turnpike. There's a slight grade on Mount Carmel, and we are starting to see, actually we've been seeing a lot of trucks use their brake retarders, which maybe Al or Officer Free can speak to a little bit more. But typically when they're using these brake retarders, it produces a very loud noise, which is very disruptive to the residents. And we've seen in other townships, including the one that I grew up in, and I think Manager McFreddy's township, where there are prohibition zones where they are not allowed to use these brake retarders, and I think it's something that we can pretty easily do here in Abington. But and maybe you've looked into this a little bit since this initially came up. Can you supplement this information for me?
Yes, Commissioner, I can give you a little bit on it. Brake retarders, commonly known as a Jake brake on trucks, is a safety feature that actually uses the engine to help slow a truck, especially when it's loaded down. It does make a loud noise when it's put in to effect. There are other townships that have implemented them or implemented a prohibition against them in some areas. I know Lower Moreland has one up on 63. the state had to come out and do a survey for that. I don't know what all it entails as far as, looking at that, as far as the survey goes, but, I mean, they have been implemented in other townships.
Do you think, is there any downside to the implementation of a brake retarder or prohibition zone? Sorry.
I mean, the only thing I would see about being an issue is the safety factor. Those Jake brakes or brake retarders are there to help slow a truck down, like I said, especially when it's loaded. So, there's always the chance, I guess, if they don't use that, there could be crash implications depending on what the situation is.
But they still have, I mean, they still can use their brakes on the
Yes.
truck to
Yeah.
stop the truck.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, the complaint's the noise. Yep.
Is this where it exists other places? Is it in a zone? Do you know what I mean? Like it's a certain section, like this street only? and
Yeah,
then
it's
it
along
has to-
portions of roadways, like in Lower Moreland, there's a specific section of Route 63. There's signage up there that, that they can't use their brake retarders along that stretch of road. It's usually not like a neighborhood. It's usually one specific area on a street.
So we would have to come up with guidelines. I know that you've brought that up. I don't know if anybody else has a problem in there. I've never heard anybody mention this, although I guess it could be a problem other places. So I guess we'd have to look at if there's certain parameters that, in case it's in other wards, that would meet those same requirements.
Yeah, that's right. I have a copy of the survey that PennDOT undertakes when they look at it, so I'll have to look at that a little further and see what it entails.
And that would be separate from the traffic calming, yes. Did you have a comment? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really pretty straightforward. You typically see these brake retarder ordinances in areas where there's a lot of truck traffic and where there's a lot of speed, where if people were driving more slowly with a heavy load, they wouldn't have to worry about brake retarders. So it's typically in areas where you see a lot of truck traffic that carry heavy loads. Turnpike, or if you're on 152 and you're coming around the corner where those folks are seeing it.
Commissioner Klein?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on that section of Mount Carmel Avenue. I had my office there for, 10 years or so. And coming down the hill, it is a pretty good thoroughfare for truck traffic out to the Turnpike. And we've heard them all the time, so.
Yeah. I guess the only fear, like you said, is if there's any danger from not using them, but I would have no idea.
It actually is, I mean, there's supposedly the Jake brakes are more effective, especially when a truck is loaded.
Okay. Commissioner Spiegelman?
From what I've researched, the engine braking or Jake braking is it's popular technique because it does reduce the wear and tear on the truck's traditional braking system. But otherwise, the traditional braking should work just fine in those situations, and it certainly is a lot less noisy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Did that, so I guess what we're going to look at is two separate things, an ordinance regarding brake retardants and what would be in, what we would need to put into that and what kind of parameters. Is that what you're looking for here?
I think we should do a little due diligence first. I think we should probably take a look at the impacts and the effects of having a prohibition zone on Mount Carmel to start. And make sure that, we're not causing a safety issue as far as, overloading trucks and having them coast out into the intersection at North Hills Ave or something like that. My instinct's telling me that that's not going to be an issue, but we should definitely take a look at it and
Yeah, with the speed there, I wouldn't foresee that as being an issue.
Right,
So.
yeah. So, and then after that, I think I've already passed on, I think, one or two other township ordinances to the solicitor to look at the language of, and we can draft one up.
Thank you. So that kind of takes care of that one. As far as the traffic calming, I know you took a lot of notes this evening. I was watching you as the residents spoke and as we spoke as well. I'm thinking probably because so many things other than the speed bumps and humps and tables came up, that we want to take some more look at putting some of those things into whatever we decide to do at the actual future public safety meeting. And, I know some people said that they wanted to work on that or give some ideas, so, yeah.
I think it'd be appropriate if we tweak the draft guidance manual that we've currently been using, distribute it to the committee members and commissioners who want to see it, and they can add comments to it, kind of a working document. Because there are a number of things. I mean, as we talked earlier and you mentioned, there's been a lot of discussion around speed tables and all of that, but there are so many other areas. And one gentleman mentioned one of the most effective areas is prohibiting traffic in certain areas from certain times of day. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in producing a document for the commissioners to review, and we should probably do that and then circulate it.
Thank you. Any last comments from commissioners? Commissioner Myers and, sorry. Commissioner.
I think this workshop was excellent, and I'm sure that we're going to follow up in many ways, but I would like to see radar, and I think the new thing's Vadar, I'm not sure, but radar, because I think that's the biggest problem that we have in Pennsylvania for our municipal police officers, not able to do true enforcement. And that's a discussion that we may want to include our state rep and our state senator. It's ridiculous that Pennsylvania municipal local police departments do not have radar. And in this country, it's just ridiculous.
Thank you. Commissioner Gillespie.
Yes, and that bill keeps languishing up there in the state. Can I just bring up one other thing, and it is safety, but these have two wheels. Just to put it out there in public, since we're all here for public safety, bicycles. I'm really having a challenge. Actually, coming over Edge Hill Road tonight, there were 7 young, I would say from 8 to 12 to 14, riding up Edge Hill Road on their bicycles all over the place. I'm like, what's going on here? Traffic was all slowed up on Keswick Avenue. I don't know about Commissioner Vahey's ward, but on Keswick, they're doing wheelies in the middle of Keswick Avenue in Ward 13. Can we look into that somehow? Is there anything that can be done? I don't know. I mean, bicycles. When, we used to have rules,
Certainly, we'll get that out to patrol and make sure they pay a little bit more attention to that. But also, typically, every year in the schools, we tend to address that with the children as well. But it's usually not until they meet a police officer outside that they get the message. And
I think they missed it because, I mean, they are really rambunctious. They're all over the place and doing these wheelies, and I'm like, whoa, somebody's parents are going to be very unhappy when their kiddo gets hit. They're not stopping for stop signs. They're coming down hills, going right out onto Keswick Avenue, and I'm like, wow.
We'll get that out so the officers pay attention.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to put it out there. Oh my gosh, was that scary? They were doing all this. Yeah. Really?
Sir, excuse me, sir, you're
Thank
not on
you.
the microphone, so.
Thank you.
I have to cut you off because you're not being recorded, because you're not on the microphone, so. One last comment, and then I'm going to adjourn this meeting.
I thought bike riders are held under the same standards as vehicle safety. I mean, they can't get like points or anything, but they still can get citations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so, I mean.
Well, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought you had to obey but no helmets, I haven't seen one with a helmet, so.
They do
that's just the
typically.
beginning.
Excuse me. Typically, it's just an educational piece with the younger children that you're mentioning, Commissioner Gillespie, and we'll get on that. We'll see.
I don't think they're that young, though. They're 10, 12, I think they should know better. But what do I know?
It was just pointed out to me, I didn't open up for public comments for the brake retarders. Did anybody want to speak to that from the public?
George Beetham again, 2819 Mount Carmel Avenue. It's my fault that we're talking about this. I brought it up with Commissioner Thompson. I wanted to add 2 things to the discussion that's been held. One is that I've camped a lot in West Virginia where grades can run from 30 to 40% on some of those mountain roads. And on those roads, I'm glad they have brake retarders. I mean, believe me, those trucks coming down those mountain roads, that would be a real problem if they didn't have that means of stopping or slowing down. The grades on Mount Carmel Avenue, I measured out in front of my house with a clinometer, and it's less than 10%. It's probably somewhere around 5%. And that's hardly the sort of place where you need a brake retarder. Farther up on Edge Hill, from Edge Hill to where Limekiln Pike splits off, the grade there would be a little steeper, but I still don't think it's anywhere close to 30%. It's probably not even close to 20%. It's probably around 10, maybe 12% there. So what we're talking about are grades that really don't approach anything where you really need a brake retarder. The only places in the whole township where it would possibly be of use, coming down off of Camp Hill on Susquehanna Road, coming into the Abington Township. I don't even know if that's in our township or if it's still in Upper Dublin, but that's one place where it might approach a grade where you would need it. And then the only other places would be over on the eastern part of the township, down around Penn State, Woodland Road and those areas. But you're not going to see heavy truck traffic on those roads at all. So, but I thought you want to make that point, that these things are really useful on steep grades. We don't have those steep grades here, and so they just make noise. And it seems like it's right out in front of the house where I live that they hit these things. So it'll jolt you out of your reverie in the afternoon when you hear that thing go off. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So you're going to put something together for the committee and the other commissioners?
Yes.
Thank you very much. If there's no further comment, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.